It seemed like this thing that had really been lost, something that was really unusual about downtown Los Angeles and really special that was gone. It just so happened that when I started working in Preservation for Historic Resources Group, one of their big projects that they were just finishing up was the reinstallation of Angel's Flight.
We love the San Gabriel Valley. There are some amazing people and businesses here, and we think they deserve the spotlight. Welcome to the SGV Master Key Podcast. We'll have on the people that make the SGV great. We'll find out what makes them tick, their ups and downs, their history, and we're going to have fun doing it. This is the SGV Master Key Podcast. And now your hosts, Scott Warmoth and Russell Mano.
All right, SGVers, welcome back to another episode of the SGV Master Key Podcast. I'm really excited for today's show for reasons that I'll reveal later, but welcome to the show. If you're new here, we go in depth to the stories behind the people in the SGV, people and businesses. And so if that's your thing, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're a regular listener, stay tuned. We have a great show for you today. And once again, just before we start, know that we've partnered with San Gabriel Valley Now, your source for city news, announcements, events, special savings, and everything SGV. Check them out on Instagram, sgv.now, and read their SGV Now magazine, sgvnow.com. Well, if you are a regular listener to the show, you know that Scott and I always have a little intro related to the guest. And my connection to the guest is a little bit different, but we were talking before the show. One of the wonderful things about the San Gabriel Valley, in particular, I would say Pasadena, is the architecture here, and the wonderful homes here. Like, I could just drive around forever and look at these beautiful homes. Yeah,
the heritage, the traditions. When I moved to Pasadena in 1993, I didn't know what a treasure I was moving into. I had lived in West LA, and we felt it was time to raise a family in a better surrounding than West LA. And we were lucky to find a home in Pasadena. We didn't seek out Pasadena. And as I said, I didn't realize the treasure we were moving into, but we found a beautiful home on a street called Prospect Boulevard, which is just off Orange Grove and overlooking the Rose Bowl. And, our neighbor's house, I found out, afterwards, was a Greene Greene, which is, just a wonderful, I guess, it's an architectural style that is not unique to Pasadena, really flourished in Pasadena. I guess we can talk more about that today. And then we had two houses down was a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and living on this street over the years, I discovered how special Pasadena is, and how that's a very special part of Pasadena too. Mm-hmm. And right at Orange Grove, within a block or two of our street, was a house called the Gamble House, which is just a monument to, a Greene Greene also, but a monument to this style. And we were just so lucky. And I have appreciated Pasadena since we moved there in 1993. And I think when you live in Pasadena, you feel that you owe something to the city of Pasadena. And I always made sure that we developed our home in, I would get the finest designer, because I felt Pasadena housing needed the finest designers.
Sure.
So anyway, instead of me rambling on and on, but I just cannot say enough about Pasadena, just the beauty, the legacy, the history, the traditions,
Sure. The Gamble House is something I really love to see and visit. And when our guest today said that she was going to come, I was so very excited, to have this inside look into this really special place in Pasadena. And let me introduce her. Her name is Jennifer Trotoux. She's the Director of Collections and Interpretation at the Gamble House Conservancy. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So please share with our audience, well, let me back up a little bit. This is the first time where we have someone who's a guest, but is sort of representing something else, right? And that is really special. But what is your connection to the San Gabriel Valley?
It goes back to about the 1930s when my family was first here. I'm Armenian on one side and Sicilian on the other. And my Armenian grandfather, was born in Alexandria, Egypt, and lived in New Jersey most of his life and went to City College of New York for college, obviously the first generation of the family to study that way. And he was an especially bright person, and he left City College of New York to come to California and to study at Caltech. So he got his master's degree there in engineering. He was a structural engineer, and that was really the first family member who lived here. And so when I think about, Caltech in the 30s, there really wasn't much there. It was still kind of, there was a lot of houses that were developed in the 1920s around the campus, but there was still a lot of orange groves and that sort of thing surrounding the campus. It was out quite far east in Pasadena. And so he was really here at a very special moment in the history of that institution and also in the history of Pasadena. I think just as it was really becoming a sort of a grown-up city that had its own institutions, and, the difference between looking at Pasadena City Hall from the mid-1920s and looking at what the town looked like 20 years before that, it had really started to grow and develop a lot. So he was here at a kind of a pivotal moment when it was really becoming a city. On my mom's side, the Italian side, we lived a little bit farther east in Monrovia. I think my great grandmother lived. She was sort of the oldest family member who had come. She had come to this country in 1917, and then in the 1940s, my family moved out here from Rochester, New York. So again, it's that sort of post-war moment when lots of people are moving to Southern California, lots of people moving from East Coast cities where they were kind of pigeonholed for their ethnicity. So my grandfather, like a lot of other people, was coming to California to get away from the ethnic stereotyping that he was kind of ensnared in back east. So he had a lot more opportunities out here. They lived in Temple City, and then within a few years moved to Pasadena. And he was involved with the school system in Pasadena. So that's how my family ended up here.
Well, you have roots, like deep roots here in Pasadena.
And sort of trace some of the institutions that Pasadena is famous for.
Mm-hmm.
We have a number of guests from all over the San Gabriel Valley, but it seems like, Pasadena is really at the heart of San Gabriel Valley in many ways, right? You may say SGV or San Gabriel Valley to someone, and in their mind they think of maybe Azusa or San Gabriel, but the mission certainly. But Pasadena, there's so much really rich history here in Pasadena, and so much of that is in the institutions, the education and whatnot. But certainly the architecture here is something that I really want to get into. So where did that evolve from in your life? How did you get into an interest in that?
Well, it was really from living in Pasadena as a child and just always being very observant of my surroundings, I think. And I see this in my kids too. They've kind of picked that up, and I see that not everybody looks at their surroundings that way. My parents were, they weren't involved with Pasadena Heritage, but they were members, and we had the newsletter sitting around the house, and I would kind of pick it up and look at it. And I was just always sort of fascinated with history and with, I think, especially with a sense of place. So that idea that I lived in a place that was special and different from other places around it, that there were other historic areas around Los Angeles that it was kind of connected to. Like we used to go downtown a lot, which in the 70s is saying something. Not everybody really spent any time down there, but my dad worked down there in city planning for the city when I was little. So I think that just having that exposure and kind of looking around and seeing not only the architecture, but also the geographic situation of Pasadena always struck me. So the presence of the mountains, that kind of connection to the outdoors, and how a city with special architecture and a special geographic setting really kind of made for something that was quite unique.
Mm. So where did your journey go into what you're doing now? So you had this love of or I guess you were observant a lot of what you were growing up in, and where did that transition into, something that you're doing, for work?
Yeah, I think, early on, that idea of historic preservation kind of played an important role in my life, and I started to sort of see things that were changing around me. And I'm not a person who's at all opposed to new development if it's done well, certainly. But I think that kind of exciting mix of the new and the old is what really makes a place kind of interesting and relevant and gives it some real kind of substance. So I thought I was going to study architecture just because I loved buildings. And as I was approaching college applications and visiting college campuses and all that, I realized, I don't think architecture specifically is a good discipline for me. And I think I was probably scared away from it by something like, the math aspect of it that I didn't feel confident about, or just, I knew that I wanted to do something that had to do with buildings, but I didn't know what. So when I went to college, I ended up studying, I came in as a classics major, but then I left as an architectural studies major. So I had a chance to study abroad. I was at Scripps College in Claremont. I had a chance to study in Athens for a semester and then in Florence, Italy for a semester, and came away from that experience again with this kind of like really strong idea of what makes a place special. The buildings, the culture, the people, the way all those things kind of interact over time and develop over time. So when I came out of school, it was 1992, and pretty much everybody I knew went into a graduate program at that point because the job situation just was not very promising, no matter what field you were in. So I went to Chicago because I wanted to be able to see kind of what came before California modernism and to get a better understanding of what had happened in American architecture in the 19th and early 20th century. So I went into an art history program at the University of Chicago to study there. And, I had great exposure there. I lived down the street from Frank Lloyd Wright's Roby House, which was built in 1908, the same year as the Gamble House, and really had a chance to kind of see things up close, see a very different city, be in another part of the country, and kind of get an idea of how things had progressed kind of culturally from the Midwest to California.
Yeah, you also sort of traced the history of Pasadena by going to Chicago, which is really where a lot of it started. And Chicago is just a fascinating architectural city.
It is. It's so rich.
It is probably one of the finest in the world, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. There's so much to see there and so much to think about. And, so coming out of that, I knew I wanted to come back to California. And when I came back, I ended up helping out with, there was a short course, which eventually turned into a master's program at USC that was done in the summer for a few weeks. And so you could go and study historic preservation. And so I thought, okay, well, that sounds like a good path for me. I had no idea what I was going to do with an art history degree or with my art history background. So then when I came out here, I just sort of fell in with some people who were involved in putting that program together, and I did that for those 2 weeks, and I met a lot of key people who I'm still connected to in my career 25 years later almost. So that was when I met people who said, oh, there's a historic preservation consulting firm right across the courtyard here. You ought to check that out. And I thought, historic preservation consulting, that sounds like an actual job. So eventually in late 1995, that's where I started working at Historic Resources Group in Hollywood. And that's how I ended up in historic preservation as a career. Yeah,
Pasadena during that 90s era was also sort of going through a renaissance, wasn't it?
Yes, with the changes happening in Old Pasadena, things were very different than they had been when I was a kid in Pasadena.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that so many times. In fact, even Russell, I think you have memories of Old Town or Old Pasadena that are
I do.
Different than mine.
Yeah, I would say, when I was maybe a teenager, I would venture towards Pasadena for, I don't know if you remember, there was a Pac-Man arcade next to PCC, but it was kind of dodgy, like there was like a lot of people hanging out there that you wouldn't want to really see at night. And I just remember it was not I didn't feel safe going there, in Pasadena when I was a teenager. But I didn't go towards Old Pasadena so much. But I do recall when things changed and it just became this place where everybody was headed to, on the weekends and the evenings. It was a very different place, yeah.
We used to go there to go to Old Town Music, which was down in a basement on Colorado. And I used to love to go down there because it was kind of seedy and a little bit weird. But, you know, when you're kind of a kid living in a suburban atmosphere in East Pasadena, you know, going someplace like just tiny bit seedy but it's kind of exciting.
A little bit of excitement.
So, I mean, really, there was Ernie Jr.'s was down the street, and that was a restaurant that we would go to occasionally. Yeah. Old Town Music was kind of like the big attraction in my family. And then I remember that there was that, kind of like adult, quote unquote, bookstore.
Which I think is still there.
Yeah. Yes. It's persisted.
But that's amazing when you think about it. As you said, you were kind of a suburban, person venturing into the urban mystique. But that's the funny thing about Pasadena. It is at one time this very traditional, almost Midwestern small town. And then it's a city of the greatest institutions that you would find in the world. I mean, it's really a combination, isn't it?
Yeah, it has a sort of a wholeness to it that I find very satisfying. Even though it's small, there's really all kinds of people and all kinds of housing stock and all kinds of institutions. And, Pasadena is noted for having, an extraordinary number for its size of nonprofit organizations. So, I was really struck by what you said about how you felt like you owed Pasadena something when you came here. And I think you really hit on something there. I think that's kind of the essence of what makes a place strong and what makes a community strong is that people feel like they need to give back to it.
Yeah.
And volunteerism is one way to do that, and that's certainly something that's a theme at the Gamble House that we can talk about. But yeah, I think that for its size, the kinds of resources that are here, and just the variety of people and places is really something that's special.
Yeah, as for myself, I didn't grow up in California, and to be honest, I always kind of hated California. I was more of an East Coast type of person. I grew up on the West Coast in Seattle, and even when I moved to LA, I hate everything about LA.
Yeah.
I just don't like LA. But the first time I really loved Southern California and really took pride in it was when we moved to Pasadena. And I will be the biggest, supporter of Pasadena and all that it is. It's just so amazing. I mean, my kids, growing up, like, I remember one day my daughter, came home. She was in high school, and she said, "Well, we're studying this very difficult thing in math. But luckily, my friend, her father is a Nobel Prize winner in that subject area, so we're figuring it out."
Nice.
This is Pasadena, It's like, wow, Nobel Prize winners, around the corner.
Well, it's funny when people say, to me, it always strikes me as funny when people say, people coming from other parts of the country and moving here and saying, oh, it feels like the Midwest or it feels like the East Coast. I just had this thought yesterday. I was talking to a friend. He and his wife had moved here probably about 30 years ago from Massachusetts. And he said the same thing. It feels like it reminded us of the East Coast. But to me, I'm always baffled by that as a Californian, because to me, this is like the essence of California. And to me, it's more like what we're seeing is a time period more than a place. So if you look at a town that was developed in the sort of mid to late 19th century in California, and you look at one that's developed in that same time period in the Midwest or on the East Coast, that's where you're seeing kind of the same model. There was just sort of an urban blueprint almost of how buildings were organized, how streets were organized, where you put the houses, how the houses were spaced from one another, how the buildings were spaced. Yeah, and it really is consistent just within that time period more than within that place. It just so happens that a lot of California wasn't developed during that period, but Pasadena was. And a lot of towns, even that are old in California, have lost that center that Pasadena still maintains in such a strong way. Anaheim is really the best example of that. Anaheim had a downtown just like Pasadena does. it was an old settlement from the mid 19th century, old for California. And it had a nice linear downtown with the brick buildings all one against the other and little alleyways and all that kind of thing. And in the 1970s, there was a sort of taken over by this kind of urban redevelopment mindset where they looked at the rest of Orange County developing and said, geez, we're looking really old and cruddy up here. We've got to look like the rest of Orange County and keep up. And they came through and just wholesale demolished all those buildings. There was like something, I think it's called Project Alpha. They had a whole plan where they were going to demolish all these old buildings and build a new downtown. Of course, that quote unquote new downtown that they built was just a bunch of office buildings. It didn't have any cultural meaning. It didn't have any historic meaning. It didn't have any connection to that place. And, it was kind of a disaster for many years. And so these beautiful neighborhoods full of historic houses that very few people know about in Anaheim really ended up with kind of no center. The center was just carved out of it. So slowly, by little, they've been trying to rebuild that. And the strength of those neighborhoods has really rebounded through the efforts of the city to really support historic preservation in the historic center. So, I think that a lot of communities had that, not a lot, but, a number of communities had that and lost it. And in Pasadena, we were pretty stubborn about hanging on to that.
Yeah, how was Pasadena able to hold on to that heritage where other cities couldn't do it?
I think a lot of it, I think culturally, I think that Pasadena was kind of had an advantage because people had a longer view there. But it really takes the activism of the property owners there that really got together. And, a lot of them, of course, probably wanted to sell to bigger entities and all that. But there were a number of property owners who for decades really fought that idea that the area should be redeveloped. So they knew that the buildings that they had value, and that they would, those buildings could bring us into the future, and it would be a much more humane future, a very different kind of future, and one that was much more people-centered and was connected to the community. So that kind of, the efforts of Pasadena Heritage and those property owners, and then eventually, kind of them forcing to get the city on board, is really what made that happen. So it really kind of takes a grassroots effort to really support something like that.
There was in this, let's say, 60s, or even going back way before that, there was a certain view of Pasadena as a, white, conservative, little old lady from Pasadena, and I think there's a different view of Pasadena today. How do you think Pasadena is viewed today?
Yeah, it's funny. The Pasadena that I grew up in, I grew up going to Pasadena public schools, and we didn't live in a fancy neighborhood. And I knew that there was this whole other sort of social segment and kind of economic stratum of people who went to private schools and lived in fancy neighborhoods and didn't really want to leave those places. But I grew up in a much more kind of democratic Pasadena, where there was much more of a mix of people of different ethnicities and different races. And it was just, I just always had a different sense of what Pasadena was than the stereotype of it. But it also really has changed, and people's recognition of the kind of the broadness of the community and what kind of value people all from all parts of Pasadena and all kind of kind of demographics of Pasadena bring to the mix, I think has really changed. But I was saying to my dad, who grew up in Pasadena, if I could live in any neighborhood, I'd live over in Madison Heights, and I'd be able to walk to places, and it's like the houses are so beautiful, and everybody really cares about maintaining the integrity of the houses, and and he was just kind of astonished, because he says, yeah, when I think about it, when I was younger, I never would have wanted to live in those places because it was very stuffy and very politically conservative, and so even not only our view of those places has changed and we sort of see them more broadly, but a lot of those, people really have turned over and really have, there's people moving into Pasadena from other parts of Southern California, which sometimes makes me a bit nervous because I'm not sure they'll get it.
Yeah.
I'm afraid they're going to destroy their house before they really get it. But
you don't see that happening, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm cautious about that. I think people have kind of figured out that they can move here from the west side and that the housing is cheaper and there's like a million terrific private schools for them to send their kids to and all that. But I don't know what that means for the long term. I hope that these people kind of take on the ethos of Pasadena, but it's also good that they change it a little bit. So it becomes less entrenched and it becomes a little bit more dynamic over time. And I think that dynamism is really something that the institutions of Pasadena, like Caltech in particular, and JPL really bring to town.
Yeah, I was just thinking that very same thing, that it's the nature of colleges to do that anyway. But, it's true. I remember when I moved here in 1993, the seller of our house said very clearly, Pasadena is a private school city. And then you think of some of our guests on the podcast over the last couple of years. Larry Wilson was one of them who grew up, went to a private school. Went to a public school.
He went to John Muir.
He went to, I meant to say,
yes.
He went to a public
That's
school.
That's where my parents went to.
Yeah, he was, public school educated and didn't grow up, with this, nose in the air type of attitude. And so I think Pasadena really has been quite open through the years. But, it does have this, there is very definitely a stereotype almost that's attached to it.
Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate. I mean, with the schools, I always mention whenever I can that I went to public schools here. And, my niece and nephew are in the public schools here. And, I think that kind of dismissive attitude toward the Pasadena public schools and that kind of idea that that ship has sailed and we can't get the public schools back, and there's so many great private schools anyway, like why would you do that? It's such a disservice to the town, and I really feel like Pasadena will never be truly great until it has great public schools. And my parents have told me that when they were in high school here in the early 60s, that John Muir was like the number one feeder school to Stanford. So it's, if the Pasadena schools could be that, kind of have that level for everyone, and I think there are terrific paths through the Pasadena schools and incredible opportunities that the kids have, including at the Gamble House. We can talk about our junior docent program. But, until that really happens and people kind of recognize the importance of public schools to the community, there'll always be that missing piece for me.
Yeah. Not to shift gears here so abruptly, but I was trying to figure out as this conversation is going on the value of what you do, and I didn't really appreciate the architecture here in the San Gabriel Valley until I left, and I drove, let's say, in a city like Las Vegas, and you can drive for miles down a road, and all the houses look the same, and then you pass the strip mall and it all looks the same, and it's all this, the same businesses, and I was really struck by that. I was like, wow, this is really bizarre, and I didn't really know until I left. And other cities in the U.S. are like that, and maybe that's all they know. But you come to a place, with so much character here, and I was like, wow, I really appreciate that. So how do you see, what is going to happen to those towns in 20, 30, 50 years? Are they really going to want to preserve that? What is there something there worth preserving? In my opinion, it doesn't feel like it.
I know that feeling. I think I got into historic preservation at a moment where, for example, we got a phone call one day about the Superior Oil Company building downtown, and it, not to spoil the end of my story, but it eventually became the Standard Hotel, so that people know what building we're talking about. And so this is a mid-1950s office building. And my wonderful boss and mentor, Christy McAvoy, I came in and I told her, Christy, we got this call about this 1950s office building that I've always thought is really cool. And I said to the guy when he called, gosh, I didn't think that anybody but me had noticed how great that building was. And she kind of jokingly, because she's been, very dedicated to the cause of the changes in preservation, but She kind of said jokingly, I was going to retire before I had to analyze buildings like that. So I think that it really takes that time and distance from things. But there's an example of, a building that, to a lot of people just looked like a junky 50s office building. But it was, when you looked more closely at it, you saw the real thought and care and quality that went into it. It was done by, an important architect, Claude Bielman, and it was done at a moment where a lot of important things were happening in Southern California. It's tied to the development of the oil industry, and I think they maybe were some of the money in the oil was coming from Texas. I don't know if I'm recalling that correctly, but it's when you look at a place and you see when it was developed, that's where there's always an important story to be told. And I remember being in some kind of a seminar that had drawn people from around the country, and we were talking about 1950s buildings, and a guy from New Jersey just sort of flatly said to all these people who were convened in San Diego or something, there's nothing important about 1950s buildings. It's all just junk. I can't believe that you're looking at this stuff. And, this is probably around 2000 or something. So over 20 years ago. But, and I just looked at him like, oh, this poor guy, he really doesn't get it. If so many important things happened here during the 50s. There was money here, there was energy here, there was economic transformation here, and there were tons of people moving here. And a lot of the buildings that were built in that era really reflect that. It's that kind of the optimism and the dynamism, and those particular industries, are reflected in the architecture. And that's what you have to really understand about a place. Okay, maybe where you live in New Jersey, nothing happened in the 1950s, so there's no good buildings. There's no story to be told. So I think that's what it really is just looking back to see, what can I make of this period? Is there anything interesting? Is there any interesting story to be told here about the development, about the architecture, about the economics of it, about the movement of people, and can that be brought out in a story about the buildings or the urban landscape? So what's happened more and more in historic preservation, I would say even just over the past 10 years or so, is trying to look at preservation from a perspective not just of buildings and great architecture, but, there was already an idea that vernacular architecture has value. It's not just architecture with a capital A that we want to preserve. But then kind of recognizing vernacular architecture and then moving on to recognize places and buildings and ideas and businesses and things like that are not necessarily, it's not necessarily the building that represents that idea. And, it's hard for me to talk about because it's even, it's a bit of an ephemeral idea. So I'm an architectural historian, and I'm used to buildings that represent things and urban landscapes that represent things. But more and more there's this recognition that there's a story to be told, even if the buildings aren't what we'd call special or great or substantial.
Fascinating. I think what you're saying is you look at what was happening at that time. And I think in Pasadena, and you know better than I, but I just think it seems to me the turn of the century, 1905 to 1910 was a very prominent time period. The 50s were very important. And I would say the last 20 years. These are sort of are these the most powerful time periods? Well, I guess there was the 20s and 30s as well. No, you could almost look at every decade then, can't you?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that you were mentioning about the 60s and kind of the way things were in Pasadena in the 60s. I remember when I was a kid watching, the TV show Gidget or something, and they said, well, we're going to Pasadena. And they said, why were we going to Pasadena? Why would we go over there? And she said, well, where else would you go to buy a used car? And I was kind of indignant. I thought, what? This is not a place to buy a used car, but in the 60s, it really kind of was. So, it's had its ups and downs, certainly. But I'm really glad that we got out of that used car stereotype phase.
Right. Yeah, well, the 60s actually, it wasn't really a good period in Pasadena, was it?
I think that there wasn't a whole lot happening.
Yeah, right. It was like before and after.
Yeah. I mean, there were probably important things happening that led to change eventually. And, but in terms of the building stock, not really.
No.
There's wonderful, modernist buildings from the 50s in Pasadena, particularly in the residential stock.
Yeah. Right.
But you don't really see it in the city itself.
No, I don't. Yeah.
Well,
Well, I know Russell would like to talk about the Gamble House.
Yeah, we should talk about the Gamble House.
I would. I just want to thank you though, really quick on that perspective, because going back to my memory of Vegas and through your lens of the story that it tells, right? Like the rapid growth, and wanting to accommodate the families and all that. Like it had to happen fast, and so now I see that through a different lens. You know. Yes, I am very excited to talk about the Gamble House. But before that, we ask each guest to bring an item of significance with them. Jennifer, what did you bring with you today?
So I brought something very small that fit in my pocket. This is, I'll let you get a close-up of this at some point. So this is a pin from the grand reopening of Angel's Flight. Angel's Flight, of course, is the incline railway in downtown Los Angeles. It was one of at least two at the time. There was Angel's Flight and Court Flight. Angel's Flight, I think, was built in 1901. And when I was a child in the 1970s and my dad was working for the redevelopment agency, Angel's Flight was dismantled and off in a warehouse somewhere, and you couldn't see it. So I had seen photographs of it. I knew about Angel's Flight. My dad had kind of told me, don't worry, they put it in safekeeping, and someday they're going to pull it out of mothballs and they're going to reinstall it on the hillside. And I remember looking at him as a kid and just going, yeah, right, Dad. That's never going to happen. So it seemed like this thing that had really been lost, something that was really unusual about downtown Los Angeles and really special, that was gone. And it just so happened that when I started working in Preservation for Historic Resources Group, one of their big projects that they were just finishing up was the reinstallation of Angel's Flight. So in March of 1995 or 6, I can't quite read this, they had this big grand reopening, and I was able to go there with all my new colleagues in my first big professional job and celebrate the reinstallation of Angel's Flight. So, what that represents to me is that kind of, that generational promise, really, that okay, Bunker Hill is going to move forward. It's not what it was at all, but that we can integrate these things with the new buildings there and the history. Just in terms of like how I feel like that whole little area never really took off. I don't think. And of course, they've had troubles with Angel's Flight itself, just mechanically and in other ways, I guess, just trying to keep it functioning over the years since the mid '90s. But it's still there, and I would like to see that area just immediately around it look better. If there was some kind of urban design vision for how that thing could be kind of ensconced in something that made it less sort of abandoned on this hillside, that would make me happy sometime in the future. So maybe that'll be the next step. But at least
doesn't that go
back
right up to like where the Wells Fargo buildings
to California
are?
Plaza. Yeah, it
right.
connects. It essentially connects from Hill Street down where Grand Central Market is, up the hill to California Plaza. So
Yeah,
it certainly,
I have never
it serves
been
a
there.
function.
Have you?
My wife wanted us to go there, so my wife and my two girls, we went there just to visit that. She wanted to see I don't know what it's called,
That
incline
tram
is it a train?
Yeah.
And it's for 50 cents still, I think, today. And we went there just to visit it and to experience it. I know my wife would really enjoy meeting you because now there's a Gamble House and then connection to this. So she found a show where they redo medieval like castles, water towers, things in Europe. And they keep the outside structure and they modernize the inside, but keep as much amazing. So I think you two would very much get along. So let's go on to what you're doing now with the Gamble House. So what exactly do you do there?
So I just to back up a little bit, I started I feel like my journey with the Gamble House really started when I was a child. So I always loved the Gamble House. I loved craftsman style architecture. I lived in a newer part of Pasadena. And so, being in a neighborhood like Bungalow Heaven, which was right near the elementary school I went to at Longfellow. Longfellow, by the way, was designed by Henry Greene. It's been altered since then, but the building is still similar to what it was and has a lot of historic features in it. But having exposure to an old neighborhood and friends whose houses I would walk to in the neighborhood, and walking by all these bungalows, and I just loved that. So, and the Gamble House has always been kind of, like I always call it the mothership of craftsman architecture. So, having had that kind of background and that experience, and really everything that the Gamble House kind of represented about Pasadena for me, just the history and the architecture and that naturalness of its sort of, the way it fits into the natural surroundings of the town. Eventually, when I was leaving Chicago, I was giving a tour at the Roby House one day, and the new director of the Gamble House knew then, he was there for 30 years eventually, but Ted Bosley was on my tour. And he said, that was a great tour. If you're ever in Pasadena, please come visit. And he gave me his card, and I looked at it, and he's, 2,000 miles away from Pasadena. And somebody looks at his card and says, "Oh, you're the new director of the Gamble House." And he kind of was taken aback by that. And I said, "Well, I'll be there in August. I'll see you next month." And so I went and I talked to Ted in his office, which at the time was up in Clarence's bedroom in the Gamble House. And just, that was kind of a really nice introduction to the people and the places that I was going to be involved with throughout my career. And then, about 10 years later, I moved to Eagle Rock from West Hollywood and thought, okay, I'm close enough to the Gamble House. I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to sign up, and I'm going to become a volunteer docent there. So that's what I did. I went into the training class that started about a month or two after we moved, and I became a docent. I eventually, so I learned to give tours. I got the terrific, kind of deep introduction to Greene Greene and to the period, and just sort of how to present architecture to the public that we give to all of our docents. And then after a few years of doing that, I was tapped to be on the board of the Friends of the Gamble House. And I was in the leadership of that organization for several years. We can't even really remember how many. And my friend who I was serving on that board with, she and I eventually ended up on staff at the house. So in 2016, the curator who'd been there for about 12 years was leaving. And she said to me, I think you ought to consider applying for my job. She thought it could use somebody who had a preservation background. So she was moving back east, and I applied for the job. And eventually that did work out. So that's when I became the curator there. So when I first started working at the house, it was such a magical experience. And I remember just every weekend thinking, like, how can I stay here all weekend and, do more work? And I just didn't want to stay. I didn't want to go home. But, things got, I had sort of a blissful 6 first months. And then things started to get a little bit complicated in our relationship with USC. So
this was about the late...
this was 2017 that I started there.
Right, yeah. Because the USC connection is...
That's right. It's
changing.
Gone through a lot of change.
Yeah.
So in 2018, we started to think about, like, how could we manage this ourselves? We being the whole Gamble House community, the staff, the volunteers, and especially just people who we knew were just rock solid supporters of the Gamble House and would always do what we needed to really help the house be guided properly and have a strong foundation. And, some of the most important players in that certainly are members of the Gamble family. So there was a long time of kind of just discussing that, seeing how feasible it was, trying to figure out how the 1966 gift agreement, when the family gave the house to the City of Pasadena and, put it under USC stewardship, essentially, how that relationship could be changed within the context of that legal agreement. So I ended up just by luck, in the middle of all that conversation. And really, that was my first experience with a nonprofit organization, except as a volunteer. And so I was in the middle of something kind of exciting, but really frightening because we really didn't know where it was going to go and if we were going to be successful. So eventually, Terry Tornick, who was the mayor of Pasadena at the time, and he really believed in what we were trying to do and really believed that we could establish our own nonprofit that would just be dedicated to the running the Gamble House, essentially, to its stewardship, to employing the employees, and all those things that needed to happen. So he was the one who was able to go to the provost at USC and really make that happen. Like, we needed somebody in a higher position than any of us was in to really say, this is something we need to do. We need to make it more community-based and less academic-based. And really, we have 55 years of experience with this, and we can do it. So fortunately, that all worked out, which is kind of amazing, really. And it worked out within a very short period of time. Between 2018, when that sort of started brewing, and the beginning of 2020, when the Gamble House Conservancy took over, that's, looking back, it's an amazingly short period of time that we were able to successfully do that. So USC cooperated with us and coughed up our endowment that they'd been holding. And now we have just a lot more autonomy in terms of how we run the organization, what kind of transparency we have, which is really important with any kind of stakeholders of the house. How we manage things. We just have many fewer layers of bureaucracy.
Who does own the house?
So the house is still owned by the City of Pasadena. So that was in the original gift agreement in 1966. The grandchildren of David and Mary Gamble gave the house to the City of Pasadena. So it was kind of, there was, the critical players were the city as the owner of the property, and all the furnishings were given to the city as well. So that in original kind of, what's really the heart of our collection belongs to the City of Pasadena, as well as the property itself. Then USC was brought in to manage and steward the house because they had the School of Architecture, and the family had that confidence that it would be well taken care of, because it wasn't just going to be another old house owned by a university where they go through and paint everything white and put sprinkler systems in it and all that kind of thing just to bring it up to code. So they wanted it preserved as a piece of architecture that people could have access to and learn from.
And so now who is stewarding it?
So now USC's role has been taken over by this new nonprofit, the Gamble House Conservancy. We officially took over, and all the employees transferred from USC employment to the Gamble House Conservancy employment at the beginning of April in 2020. So this was 2 weeks after we shut down for COVID. Yeah. And, in a way, it kind of gave us the sort of the time and the space to think about what it meant now to be under this kind of different umbrella. And we were trying to reinvent so many things at that moment anyway, because we couldn't be there at the house. We couldn't be open to the public. And we had to figure out a lot of things. So it was just a time of all kinds of change, not only because of COVID, but also because of this conservancy transition that happened.
I want to get into what has changed now. I think the last time I actually took a tour was definitely before then. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anything has changed regarding the tour, but let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
At Wormuth Law, they believe that just because you speak a foreign language, come from a different culture, or simply don't know how to navigate the legal system, that should not prevent you from compensation from injury or receiving benefits. Their multicultural staff have been helping SGVers like you for over 38 years. Visit law888.com or call them at 626-784-7017 and tell them you heard about them on this podcast.
All right, we're back with Jennifer from the Gamble House. So before the break, we were talking about, the Conservancy had just taken over right before the pandemic. So how did you guys weather that?
Well, we were really fortunate. We had a lot of momentum from the fact that the Conservancy had just been established and it was a new organization. And so people really wanted to support us. So we were really gratified by the way people stepped up to become founding members of the Conservancy. That gave us a lot of good financial stability starting off, even though we didn't have our normal stream of income coming from the bookstore and from tours. So, that tour income is really how we make most of our money. I mean, I wouldn't say most of our money. I'd say, we have a pretty good balance where about a third of our income comes from programming like tours. A third of it comes from our endowment income, because we have this endowment that was a real focus for Ted Bosley, our former director, trying to build that up and really make that a regular stream of income for us. And then the other third comes from donations, gifts, foundation grants, and that sort of thing. So, so it wasn't as if our entire income was wiped out because we had that good distribution of sources of income. But the tours really are the most important thing for the public and the way that people are able to interact with the house. So to be able to find other ways to offer that, that was really critical in the success of that next year. So in July, a few months in, the staff all got together and decided to do an exterior tour. So the lead on that was Ann Scheid, who was the archivist, the curator of the Greene Greene archives over at the Huntington, and she is a landscape historian, and so she kind of stepped out in front to put together an outline of how we would talk about the house if we could only present it from the outside. So eventually the staff all got together and stood very far apart on the lawn and kind of walked it and saw if it worked. And then by July, we were ready to roll it out and start training some of the docents to give this exterior walk, essentially. So we called that the Gardens and Gables Tour, and we're still doing it. And it gave us a chance not only to talk about the exterior of the house, but also to kind of put it in the context of the land that it was on, the views of the mountains and the Arroyo Seco, and how the afternoon breezes come across the property, and what are sleeping porches for, and really think about how the exterior of the house and the setting of the house make up so much of the important things about its character. Because we always focus so much on the interiors and the furnishings that were designed by Greene Greene. So this gave us a chance to kind of look at it from a different perspective. So that was kind of fun for us to develop. And people have really responded to that tour. It's still, even though people can come in the house, people still elect to take the exterior tour. And we're right now we're trying to get that to the point where it's an audio tour that people can take outside if they just come to the property sometime when there's no tours available, we're closed, or we're sold out, or whatever.
Wow. If I could go back in time and choose a different career, Japanese craftsmanship is something that I really think I would enjoy and love. And I remember sitting out in that little, waiting for the tour to start and just sitting there. And I knew nothing about Greene Greene. I knew nothing about the house. And I thought, wow, this feels kind of Japanese, Yeah. I didn't know at the time, but just sitting there, I could see that in there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if did I say the Gamble House was one of my SGV3? I don't know. But if you have not been, you have to go to the Gamble House. My gosh. It is amazing. Even if I've not taken the garden tour, always the inside, but wow. Have you been inside the house, Scott?
I was afraid you would ask that question. I have walked past it 10,000 times.
We hear this a lot, by the way.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I lived right in the neighborhood for 15 or 20 years, and it was part of the answer is no.
Just from the get-go, once you get into the house and they close the door and then the tour starts.
And my neighbor had a Greene Greene. I was in his house.
But like right from the get-go, they close the door and they start talking about this beautiful door and the stained glass, and it's incredible. Every moment of the tour is incredible. I could go there, once a month. And it's just incredible.
Well, we wish more people would go there once a month. I mean, if you become a member of the Gamble House, which is not very expensive, you can go anytime. So
really?
The tour is included in the membership. But I think some people are intimidated because it kind of sits up a little bit on the hill and there's no fence around it, but people think there's sort of like an invisible fence that people just don't
even
cross.
I, living in the neighborhood, I was always confused. Like, what is the neighborhood church? Is it related to the Gamble House? Yeah. Is it part of? And I didn't know. Is it part of USC? Do they teach there? I was never really certain.
It's very informative for us to hear what people's hesitations are and what their confusions about it are. And I think that now that we don't have a formal affiliation with USC, it's easier. We're hoping that it'll be easier for us going forward to explain ourselves. So our new director, who started just about a year ago, is Alexandra Vrasik. Alex is a lifelong historic house museum person, and she just has a real sense of what the role of a museum can be in the community, and that strength of that vision that she has is really important for us. So, we're doing things like at the end of October 23rd, we're going to do a family day, which will be free, and we'll have special tours that are oriented towards kids and activities on the lawn and things like that. And I think the more people see things like that happening, they think, I can cross that invisible fence.
That you're opening up.
Yeah, people can come and enjoy the garden anytime, and they don't realize that. We see people. People don't know. We see people all the time pull up in front of the house. They get out. They
so
take
you can
a
actually walk onto the property.
And if we're leaving when we see people doing that, it's usually like at the end of the workday or something. We'll see people come and just pull up and stand there very respectfully, take a photo, and we say, "Go, go explore the grounds and go look at the house from behind the garage where the special garden is." And you'll see just like you see the garden when you see the house from other angles from the backyard. You're seeing a completely different structure almost. It just really comes to life as you walk around it. And we really want people to understand that, we see how respectful they are, and we're very happy to have them be that respectful, but through the grounds, they can explore the terraces, they can explore the gardens.
There are two landmarks on Orange Grove, really. The other one being the Wrigley House.
Yes.
And the same thing, I've always felt the same thing about the Wrigley House. Do you dare, walk onto the property?
I know what you mean, because I have not been inside the Wrigley House. I know that they give tours there. I would kind of imagine that their gardens also must be open for strolling.
I believe they're open. I see people with their dogs sometimes and I guess they must be. Yeah. But there's always this, you're a little bit intimidated, as you said.
Well, and it's still, even though it's not a private house and hasn't been since 1966, it's still, the building type is still a single family house.
Right.
So people have a natural kind of hesitation to cross over someone's lawn and go up to their front door, because people don't really, if they don't really understand it, they don't know that it's open to the public and that it's owned by the city and all that kind of thing. They just kind of have that hesitancy because it looks precious and it looks private.
Yeah, right. I never knew it was owned by the city until today.
Yeah.
Well, Billy, whose parents are members of Valley Hunt Club, he would tell me that they have some sort of dinner there with there's 100 people. I was like, well, okay, that feels really exclusive. I don't go to those kinds of dinners. But
what, at the Valley Hunt Club?
No, at
the Gamble House.
Is that right?
Oh, at the Wrigley Mansion.
At the Wrigley Mansion.
Yeah.
Oh.
We'll sometimes do. We had actually on Saturday. There was a benefit for the Gooden Center that was done on the lawn at the Gamble House. We have periodically a lot of nonprofits will come to us and want to host dinners outside. So it's it's a place that's open for we can arrange small meetings inside the house on the days that we're closed. The grounds and the terraces are available for receptions and things like that for nonprofits in particular. So there's other things that we do with the house besides just the interior tour. I mean, really for our programming, we're trying to open it up so that there are ways for people to interact with the house besides just taking a tour. Because if you took a tour 3 months ago and you think, oh, I'd really like to go back to the Gamble House, you can just go and explore the exterior, sit on a bench and, contemplate the fish pond and this sort of thing. But we also like to have events in the evening so that people can kind of have a more relaxed atmosphere there and be able to take it at their own pace. We participated for a few years now in Art Night. So this is a really wonderful, community-based event that's put on by the city. And I think there's something like 30 organizations that participate. All kinds of arts organizations and nonprofits around Pasadena will open their doors on this one night. The next one is coming up on October 14th. And starting at 6 o'clock, 6 to 10, the Gamble House will be open in the evening. And people can come and see it in this kind of in a way that you don't usually see it. And the atmosphere for that event is so much fun. People are very excited to see it. I will often stand at the door and I'll say, how many of you, of the people who are about to come in, have been to the house before? And none of them will raise their hand. And I'll say, you can come here 5 days a week. We're open for tours. You don't have to wait for Art Night. But I think either people don't know or they're just unsure of how to approach it. So we want to kind of normalize that experience of going to the Gamble House and coming to just enjoy all that it has to offer.
Yeah.
Well, if you're standing, I guess it's a driveway. It's a brick driveway, and you look up. It's a very imposing view almost, right?
Yeah.
But here's the connection that maybe some of the audience doesn't know, and I love, is that it was featured in a very popular movie, Back to the Future.
Yes.
It was Doc Brown's house, right?
Yeah.
I was so excited to see it and stand in the place and take it. My wife took a picture, a similar scene, a shot from the movie. But you said a lot of people come to the house just for that.
Yeah. The staying power of that association just is astonishing to me. It's 35 years later. People are bringing their kids. We see like 7-year-olds in red puffer vests, like running up the driveway, having their picture taken. Everybody with a DeLorean at some point has come over to take a picture of their DeLorean in front of the house. Although, as somebody pointed out to me, the DeLorean was never actually like shown in front of us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it was worked on in the workshop there, which was ostensibly our garage. Of course, that was done on the soundstage. But it's really had a lot of staying power. People still get that excitement of coming to the house because of that movie.
I think the times that I've taken the tour, I've seen people dressed up, in costume from the movie.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
It happens occasionally, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm excited now that I can just go there and walk around the gardens. You said there's gardens in the back of the garage?
Yeah, we had a garden installed there a few years ago. That area had just kind of gone to seed a bit, and there was a big oak tree that had overgrown what had been the cutting garden for the family. So it had changed from a sunny garden to a shade garden, and the plantings had never really kept up with it, and it just needed a lot of refreshment. So the landscape architect who did that work was Isabel Greene, who is a granddaughter of Henry Greene, one of the architects of the house. So she is still active in Santa Barbara, and she lent her talents to the house that her grandfather had designed, which was very exciting for us to have that kind of continuity. It's a beautiful spot. I mean, we needed a place for the public to be able to come and just enjoy the house and just relax and sit down and listen to the fountain and get these terrific views of the house.
Yeah.
Did I ask you when we spoke on the phone, does a USC student still live in the house?
We still have USC students in the house. We have 2 right now who are both PhD students, one in history and one in art history. In the past, they've all been students who are connected to the School of Architecture, so this is new for us. We're also open now to scholars in residence, as we call this program, from any university around the area. So the students live in the house in what were the staff quarters. There's 2 small bedrooms where the cook and the housekeeper lived above the kitchen on the 2nd floor. And they live there for a year. And they are tremendously helpful to us as just kind of like our eyes on the house overnight. So when the staff goes home, we know that somebody's living there and someone's coming and going. And it really is helpful for us, not only for security, but also just because of the relationships that develop from these fellowships. People spend, at least a year with us, kind of like as our roommates almost, staff's roommates. They live in the house, they cook there in the basement, and it's in a very limited way, I would say, it's really their home for that year, but it's not as if they're able to go down to the living room and flop down on the couch or anything like that. We never sit on the furniture.
Yeah.
Do you allow them to cook in the house?
They don't cook in the main kitchen, in the historic kitchen. They cook down in the basement kitchen, which used to be the laundry room. So that's what we use as our catering kitchen, staff kitchen, and the scholars use it too.
Wow. Has there ever been vandalism, break-in?
In a very small way, yes. I mean, we're always concerned about the vulnerability of the house. We have good security cameras, and we just have those kind of ears out all the time with the students being there overnight. But it's always a concern because even though people who are respectful of the house, as I mentioned, we want them closer to the house. We also want to make sure that the house is protected overnight and when we're closed and that sort of thing. So it's even though there hasn't been much of a problem with that, it's something that's always on our minds prevention-wise because it could change at any time.
Don't you have troves of college football fans walking by there at certain points of the year?
They don't go very close by. They're kind of out on the Orange Grove sidewalk.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't say that they're much of a threat.
Because I sort of remember like that's a path that they would take to get into the Rose Bowl, right?
Yeah, those folks have something else. They have another goal in mind.
They're only thinking Rose Bowl.
That's right. Where can I park? How do I get to the Rose Bowl?
Nice. Well, the Gamble House is certainly one of my favorite places in the San Gabriel Valley. I wish I would have. I wish I would have named it as one of my SGV3, but we're going to get into some of your favorite places in the San Gabriel Valley.
Jennifer, I'm really anxious to know, from a person like you and your sophistication.
The pressure's on.
Yes. What are 3 places you like? Places or things to do or experiences you've had?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was. I tried to kind of focus it on historic places that I'm especially fond of. I did not include the Gamble House because I thought that was a little obvious since that's what we're talking about anyway. But one of the first places I thought of was the Queen Anne Cottage at the Arboretum. So this is a house that was built, not really it was almost kind of like built as like a little kind of leisure pavilion almost by Lucky Baldwin on his ranch, which is now the grounds of the Arboretum. And he built it in 1885. So it's, that's pretty early for this area. And the fact that it's still, that it's not a house that was in town in Pasadena or something like that. The fact that it's out in these grounds and you still get kind of a sense of being out on someone's ranch in the late 19th century, to me is kind of magical. And, this is another place that was made famous by filming because the old TV series from the 70s, Fantasy Island, there was the opening sequence of that was filmed at the Queen Anne Cottage. So,
wow.
So there were a lot of people who saw it on TV every week. But it always, so I kind of knew it from that. And when I was a kid growing up in Pasadena, the Arboretum and Descanso Gardens were the 2 places that we would go to. I didn't have much experience with the Huntington for some reason until I was older. But going to the Arboretum and seeing this, this folly in the landscape with the pond that's next to it and the enormous palm trees and all that, it really just had a kind of a feeling of this place in another time. So even when I go back there today, I see it as a preservation professional. And so, there's kind of these like layers of meaning that it has for me when I go back and see it. And then there's the coach barn that's close by too. And I think that those 2 structures, to see like such a beautifully intact coach barn and sort of understand it as a complex is really fascinating to me. So we're really lucky to still have those buildings and to have them accessible on public property like that.
Wow, just the richness of the San Gabriel Valley. I'm just in awe right now, And to me, it's a very sentimental thing too, because it's the raising of your family in this environment, which I was always so proud to do. It's funny how I'm getting very sentimental about it, but yeah, it's just amazing, for you to, pick out not just the Arboretum, but these particular buildings and what they meant.
And for the listener who may not know what a coach barn is, I was wondering if you were going to mention that. I love that place too. But what is a coach barn?
The coach barn is where they kept the horses and the coaches for transportation. So.
And this was a working one, right?
Yes. And I mean, you can still see the stalls and all that. It's really, and it has this. What I think is probably Douglas fir paneling inside. And, so it really is a place that has a lot of what we call in preservation, we have this, this very non-technical concept called historic feeling. So, when we're looking at the integrity of a place, we say, does it have integrity of location? Is it still in the place that it used to be? Does it have integrity of, I'm going to skip some because I didn't think about them beforehand, but there's 7 aspects. But, does it have integrity of materials? Are these actually the materials that it was built of? Is the workmanship still intact? Does it have integrity of workmanship? And then, as you go down that list, sort of like from the more concrete to the more general to the more specific and abstract, you get down to historic feeling. So does it have integrity of historic feeling? And that's something that's really difficult to gauge. But when you go to a place like the Queen Anne Cottage and the Coach Barn, you really get the sense of being, seeing something that someone in the past saw. And to me, it's not about, with historic preservation, it's never to me about going back into the past necessarily. It's what you learn about the future and what you learn about your present in particular, and like how did you get there? Because it's not a place that just happened overnight. There's certain stops along the way, certain people and certain cultures that had an impact along the way, and how we see the land, how we see the buildings, and all that. That goes back much farther than the founding of Pasadena, obviously. So, it's that kind of feeling of what is this place really about? That to me is what a lot of historic feeling is about.
And if I'm not mistaken, you can actually walk on the cottage and you can touch the wood in the Coach Barn.
Yeah,
right?
The Coach Barn you can actually go through. The cottage they have maybe open once or twice a year to actually go into the interior, but you can always walk around the veranda that goes around most of it, and you can look inside the windows. So they're both pretty accessible.
What else is on your list?
So I was thinking about it, and I guess my experience of the San Gabriel Valley is obviously a little bit eastwardly biased or westwardly biased. Sorry. So I was thinking about my own experience and like kind of places that I go to where I see that kind of like that resonance for me. And I thought about Altadena, where I lived as a very young child, and I thought about the corner of Mariposa and Santa Rosa, and the things that are located at that corner. So, it's sort of a little crossroads there that has institutional resonance, and it's got everything from late 19th century architecture up through modernist architecture. On the southwest corner is the Altadena Library, which was designed by the local modernist architect who lived in Altadena, Boyd Georgie. And it's just a beautiful little structure, and it's really nicely preserved. It's so full of light, and it really is just a perfect kind of encapsulation of the kind of like 1950s and 60s modernism in the Pasadena area. Mm-hmm. And then across the street to that, on the north side of Mariposa, there's a property that's operated by the Girl Scouts. And I don't know much about it now, but I remember going to Girl Scout camp there.
Oh, yeah.
And like day camp. And, so there's that, there you've got these kind of institutional presences there with the library and the Girl Scout camp, and just enormous trees everywhere. And then you're right there practically at, Christmas Tree Lane on Santa Rosa. So something that, the idea that kind of that natural bounty of the San Gabriel Valley, the idea that you could plant anything and it would grow, and so these enormous cedars that line that street and became a tourist attraction then at Christmas time and still are. What else is happening at that intersection? There's residences there. This is very close to the McNally residence, which is a house that was in the same family for just decades and decades and decades, and has just recently been sold, that people have kind of been more aware of recently. A 19th century house that's really kind of an unusual survivor as well, even if its grounds haven't survived. So all this is happening in this one little corner of Altadena, and I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, Altadena could be the subject of a whole conversation itself.
It and really could.
The homes there, the people who have lived there, and it's just got the beautiful architecture and Balian's ice cream house.
Yeah.
Well, through the magic of technology, I can plant myself there and look at through the phone, and there's this low rock wall with river rock, and that's pretty prominent in Altadena and I guess parts of Pasadena, right? As part of the architecture.
Yeah, the gutters along that street are very interesting. What kind of town has interesting gutters? Well, Altadena does. So there's kind of like a these are a lot of these north-south streets kind of function as drainage ways in big storms, and so the gutters along there are these kind of deep, very deep V-shaped gutters that have little concrete bridges over them almost for the driveways to link the street to the property. And I mean, it's just a small feature that goes all the way down the street. And, I remember even seeing that as a child and thinking like, oh, this is unusual. Look at that. It's just like these kind of unusual street features that were clearly kind of old and have to do with what the natural position of the street is. They didn't do that just to be attractive. They did it to solve a real functional need, which is how are you going to get water through here in a big storm? That's just another little kind of fascinating detail at that corner.
I think we see that on Lake, right, going up to the Cobb Estate.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You see that gutter where they have that concrete going over.
Yeah.
I always imagine if what it must be like if there's a torrent of water coming down as you're coming home.
Yeah.
Wow. And do you have another?
I do have one more. Yeah.
Okay.
So the other one that I thought of, this is a place that's I think is still closed now, but hopefully someday it'll reopen. Up in Big Santa Anita Canyon, there's the Adams Pack Station. So I thought about that kind of interface between the natural and the cultural aspects of the town. And, I think Sierra Madre is always so much fun to me for that reason, because you go up there and you get this kind of feeling of being in this little town at the foothills. And, a lot of its growth came from the fact that people were coming here to treat tuberculosis and looking for a place that had drier, cleaner air. And a lot of people who moved here, there's scholars who've done work on this about how, a large proportion of the population would have been here with a sick relative. I can't remember the last name now of Michelle, who wrote, I'm so sorry, who wrote the book on Altadena and one on Sierra Madre as well. But she's done some really interesting work on this. So that closeness to the mountains and that closeness to the foothills, being able to live right up against the foothills and be able to go on excursions into the mountains. This is something that resonates for the Gamble House too, because we know that the Gamble family like to do these kinds of excursions as well. We have pictures of them on the Mount Low Railway in the first decade before they built the house, when they were just coming out here in the wintertime. But that idea that you could kind of escape the town, go up to the mountains, take a mule train up. That's how they would get supplies up, even for building
That's where
supplies.
the homes are, right? Or the pack station.
There's some little cabins just off of there.
I should say. Yeah.
Right. Those little cabins. Something that could never be built today.
Right.
But that you could just have a little vacation home that was so close by.
Yeah.
And be able to escape up into the mountains and be near a stream and under the pine trees and all that. It's really kind of another very special thing about this area.
They very rarely come up for sale. I look at them sometimes. They're very strict on what you can do to the exterior, but the interior, like some of them are amazing looking, but they just look, as they have always looked on the outside.
Yeah.
I believe Fish Canyon in Duarte, like something like 100 cabins were wiped out in a flood.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a even if you purchase one and you actually manage to get a hold of it, there's always that danger that it could just disappear at any season from a flood or a wildfire or something like that.
Sure.
They're amazing survivors.
Well, Jennifer, you accomplished something that very few have on this show, which is to have 3 unique
very unique, really.
Yeah.
Very
that we've
touching.
never heard of before either.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you for introducing our listeners to that. If people want to come see the Gamble House, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is to go to our website, which is gamblehouse.org, and take a look at our tour schedule and our event schedule. We are really looking forward to hosting more kids and families when we're open on the 23rd for the Kids and Family Day. If you're interested in becoming a volunteer there, certainly you can contact us through the website that way, or just show up for a tour and fill out a little contact form. We had a concert this past Sunday night, so there's through the DeCamera Society and Chamber of Music and Historic Places and historic sites. So there's all kinds of ways to interact with the house, but the best way to start is either to walk your dog across the lawn and go sit in the garden in the back, and then please do come take a tour. It's our volunteer docents are really very passionate about the house, and they just love to share it with people.
And the website is gamblehouse.org.
That's right.
And you guys are also on Instagram, I believe.
Yes, we are. Instagram and Facebook.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, this has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you coming down. Like I said, I was really excited, when you said that you were going to come. Thank you so much for being here and sharing so much with our audience.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, there you go. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. I hope you enjoyed that and that look into the Gamble House, and definitely go visit the Gamble House. It is an amazing place. You will not regret it. As always, you can reach out to us, info@sgvmasterkey.com, on our website, www.sgvmasterkey.com, and we will see you next week.
You've been listening to the SGV Master Key Podcast. Our passion is the small businesses and the people that make up the San Gabriel Valley, and it's our honor to have them on the show. We hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure to like, rate, and review. The show is produced by Russell Mano, edited by Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on the SGV Master Key Podcast.
Master, no, kind of master.